When we talk about Chanukah, we have to realize that Chanukah was the redemption from an exile, from a galut. And Chazal teach us from the opening of Sefer Breshit that the Jews were going to be subject to 4 exiles. It's the nature of the world that there are 4 kingdoms, 4 malchuyot, 4 forces at work in the world. There was Babylonia, there was Persia. Babylonia was the destruction of the first temple. Persia was the Purim story. The Greek exile is the Chanukah story. And the 4th exile, the destruction of the second temple, the Roman exile is what we're in. The Lashon comes from the Pasuk, the Haaretz Hayta Tohu Vavohu, V'choshech al Pnei Tahom. Tohu is Babylonia, Vohu is Persia, Choshech is Greece, and Choshech al Pnei Tahom, that's the huge exile that we're in now, hopefully coming out of it, the Roman exile. The Chazal teach us something very, very strange. They call the Greek exile Choshech. The Greek exile is called darkness. And when we think about Greek culture and what the Greeks were trying to accomplish, it's really the opening of the Enlightenment. It's on the surface exactly the opposite of darkness. All of our scientific wisdom, everything that we know about the world today, really came from Greek knowledge, Greek culture. And why do Chazal call it darkness? So Chazal tell us that Choshech ze galut Yavan, shehechshicha einehem shel Yisrael b'gzeirotehem. The reason we're calling it darkness is because they darkened the eyes of the Jewish people. They confused us. They turned us from illumination, which we had through Torah, into darkness. But what was that, the decree? They darkened us with their decrees. What was the decree that Chazal focus on? A very strange decree. The decree was, Kitvu al keren hashor, you have to write on the horn of an ox, she'ein lachem chelek be'elokei Yisrael. You have no chelek, no portion in the God of Israel. So the first thing you have to realize is that these are not atheists talking. They're not atheists. They're not saying there is no God. There is saying you have no portion, you have no connection with the God of Israel. What they are doing is they are creating a disconnect between God and the elevated spiritual world and the physical world. That is exactly what the Greeks were trying to do. The Greeks were saying that it's all about physical observance, power, human intellect. There is nothing divine, there's nothing spiritual here. It's all cause and effect. It's all nature. And they're talking about a disconnect between God and the Jewish people. What did they do when they came into the Holy Temple? Well, I know what the Babylonians did. When the Babylonians came into the Holy Temple, they destroyed it. I know what the Romans did when they came into the Holy Second Temple. They destroyed it. What did the Greeks do? The Greeks, it says, Timu kol hashmanim. All they did is they walked over to the oil and they took their finger and they touched it. Gotcha! What? Why didn't they just, if they don't like the fact that we're worshiping God in the temple, why didn't they take the oil that we needed and pour it down the drain? So this is a major question. That what is this idea of being mitame, timu kol hashmanim? So when we talk about the contrast between enlightenment, which is what the Greeks believed in, and what we want to call illumination, Torah, or there's an illumination of the Torah. Where's the conflict? And you have to realize that the Babylonians wanted to kill us, the Persians wanted to kill us, the Romans wanted to kill us, and the Greeks didn't want to kill us. They wanted to convert us into their ideology. We have a very fascinating thing that we find in the Greek exile, something called mityavnim. Mityavnim English for Mityavnim? What do they call it?
Hellenites.
Hellenists. Who are the Hellenists? They were Jews. Mityavnim, they were Jews who adopted the Greek culture. Hellenists. Very strange, very different. So, where's the conflict? There's an ideological conflict going on here. It was not to destroy us, it was to convert us. So when we talk about enlightenment, what's the difference between enlightenment and illumination? So enlightenment is everything is on the surface. What does enlightenment mean? Enlightenment tells me how it works, science, okay? It can tell me that human wisdom is what determines everything. They worship bodies, they worship buildings. Only what I, in my human understanding, is grasping is reality. Nothing is reality except what I understand. That's enlightenment. But what's missing, when you talk about how things work, is why. What's the content of those buildings? What's the purpose of those buildings? Is there a spiritual dimension to all of that physical reality? The Greeks did not hate Torah. Torah was another wisdom. And in fact, they wanted it translated into Greek, which we'll maybe talk about in a couple of weeks, in about a month when we get to Asar B'Teves in 3 weeks. But they valued Torah, they valued the written Torah as another academic discipline. What they loathed and what they prohibited was Torah Sheba'al Peh, oral Torah. Because oral Torah, we'll see in a few minutes what the uniqueness of it is. But they also prohibited 3 mitzvos, Chazal tell us. And again, we'll have to figure out why they chose those 3 mitzvos. They outlawed Shabbos, they outlawed Kiddush HaChodesh, the monthly sanctification of the new moon. That's that doesn't sound like that's so fundamental to Judaism. And Brit Milah. Those are the 3 things. What's the common denominator? What's the agenda here? So, Rav Hutner talks about how God reveals himself. He talks about 3 systems. We're going to talk about 2 of them. One is God reveals himself through nature. The will of God is revealed through nature. And the will of God is revealed through Torah. What's the difference between God's commandments of nature and commandments of Torah? Commandments of nature deprive you of free will. You get up on the top of the building, 30th floor, and you jump. There's no free will. What's going to happen? It's programmed. You have no free will. As opposed to Torah, where God gives you complete free will. God says don't light a fire on Shabbos. And you know what? You can. Okay? Right? When nature says don't put your hand in fire or you're going to get burned, you will get burned. So there's free will in the Torah and there's no free will in nature. And the Greeks believed in nature. And therefore, there's a compromise to your free will. If everything is cause and effect, what we just lost is moral decisions. All we have now are functional decisions. When the Greeks created systems, it was how do we get society to function better? And of course, that could lead to lots and lots of things. Old people are not useful anymore. Let's get rid of them. Might makes right. Or we want to make an orderly society, but there's no morality involved. So you're not making moral choices. And that's a very fundamental conflict with Judaism because we believe in moral choices. But where do those moral choices come from? How do we even talk about moral choices? Only if you realize that there's something more than what you see is what you get. Something more than the physical. There has to be some transcendent value system that has to come from above to generate moral choices. And this is what the Greeks are saying, Ein lachem chelek be'elokei Yisrael. You cannot have a connection to the divine because everything is functional in nature. spiritual? What does that have to do with anything? When we talk about reality, so in the Greek world, what's reality? What's observable? And the only truth is what I think is true. It's all about man. And that leads, of course, to a world that we have today where, we remember where there was multiple truths. And then we got to a world where there is no truth. And I think we're at a stage now where everything is true. Everything is true. Whatever. Right? The Greeks really developed the forerunner of multiculturalism. The Judaism believed that we are unique, we are special, and what the Greeks were fighting for is universalism, multiculturalism. What is Tumah? Well, Rav Shapell Hirsch talks about Tumah. We find Tumah wherever we confront death. Death of an animal, death of a person, menstruation where the potential for life is gone. Why does that create Tumah? Says Rav Shapell Hirsch, it's very worthwhile looking. He has a very long section in the beginning of Parsha Shmini where he outlines what Tumah really means. But when a person is confronted with death, over which he has no control, it's a force of nature. When we see it, we sense we are powerless. We are just controlled by the systems of nature. That could easily lead to our thoughts that I also don't have free choice over my moral decisions. Everything is cause and effect. Nature is force, no free will. Tumah could make me think that I am a victim of nature. I'm a prisoner of nature, no free will. Says Rav Hirsch, therefore, Tumah has to separate you to make you realize that while you are a victim of nature, you have no free will, your moral choices are there. When the Greeks are mitame, the oil, what is the observable difference between oil that's tahor and oil that's tameh? The observable difference is zip. Nada, nothing. No observable difference. In the Greek world, if there's no observable difference, if there's no scientifically measurable difference, then guess what? There's no difference. And that was the message. They're not saying we're going to destroy you. We're going to inculcate you with the idea that everything is what's observable. So when you study Torah, even when you study Torah, it's what you understand. Now, one of the things that happened exactly at the time of the Greek exile is that prophecy disappeared. No more nevuah. So when man wanted to know, when we Jews, we want to know what does God want, there was an aspect of nevuah, prophecy. And now there's no prophecy. So how do we know what man wants? We have to study Torah. But we're studying Torah with the human brain. And wait a minute, that's exactly what the Greeks say. You study your books and think about what you want it to mean. So here's where Torah Sheba'al Peh comes in. See, Torah Sheba'al Peh tells us that there are people who can reach a level where they can understand through their intellect what God wants. Not what they want, but what God wants. In the Greek world, it's what you want. Because everything that you think is what you want. So Torah Sheba'al Peh is something that they can't tolerate. Because that indicates that there is human wisdom is also informed by something transcendent. When there was prophecy, they couldn't deny it. But now there's no prophecy. So now there is nothing informed by anything beyond man's intellect. We don't agree with that. We don't believe in that. But, and here's the unique aspect of Torah Sheba'al Peh, is that you have to be a godlike person to be qualified to really understand. Think what we're trying to do. We're trying to take God's written Torah, and we're trying to use our human intellect and try to understand with that the will of God. That's a connection. That requires a connection between man and the divine. Something that the Greeks deny completely. You're going to pay attention in next week when you start saying Al Anisim. So you're going to say there that what the Greeks tried to do is lahashkicham Toratecha ulahaviram mechukei ritzonecha. Listen what's added there. I thought they wanted to make us forget Torah. It doesn't say they want to make us forget Torah. Lahashkicham Toratecha. They want us to forget God's Torah. They have no problem with Torah. They translated it into Greek. But they don't want it to be God's Torah. It's our Torah. It's what we understand. And lahaviram mechukei ritzonecha. What are chukim? Chukim are laws that we got from above that have no rational explanation. In the Greek world, no rational explanation, then it doesn't exist. So what we're standing for, what we have to stand for, what Chanukah is the battle of the recognition, of the realization that it's not just what we observe and what we measure and it's in the natural world. That idea of everything being measurable, which we call enlightenment, is actually darkness. We've mentioned this before. We need to remember the Mesilas Yesharin's definition of darkness and the problem of darkness. So Mesilas Yesharin says, Choshech halayla, the darkness of night. Okay, and by the way, it's not coincidental that Chanukah is the only holiday that comes out at the very end of the month and the beginning of a new month. All of the other holidays are in the middle of the month. Illumination, full moon, okay, equinox, same equal light, equal days and nights. Chanukah is in the depth of darkness, long nights, very long night, depth of darkness. So that's what Chanukah is, and that's what we've got to overcome. What's the problem with darkness? Two problems, says Mesilas Yesharim. Shnei mine ta'uyot. Famous Mesilas Yesharim, you can make two mistakes. And what are they? First of all, yichaseh ta'ayin ad shelo yireh ma shelefanav klal. You don't see what's in front of you. You could walk into the lamppost because you didn't see it. That's one mistake. O yite oto ad sheyireh amud ki'ilu hu adam. Or you could see something and think it's something else. The first problem is walking into the lamppost. The second problem is giving shalom aleichem to the lamppost, thinking it's a person. Okay? And again, all of this is part of our materialistic existence, where we operate in confusion, we operate in darkness. Okay, I think that it's certainly in our modern culture, there's a lot more confusion than there was a few hundred years ago. The more illumination we have, the more my own thing, the more multiple truths, the more confusion arises. Okay, more drug addictions, more suicides, more, I don't even want to mention, the man thinks he's a woman and the woman thinks, talk about confusion. Okay? That's darkness. We're operating in darkness. And we have to know that illumination comes from the realization that the reality is not just what's on the surface. Reality is below the surface. What's the meaning? What's the purpose? So let's talk for a minute about Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and Milah. Shabbos is the Jewish declaration that the world had a creator who created a purposeful world. And we're always focusing on purpose. And if you think carefully about Greek ideology, there's no purpose except, if we study Epicurus, source of Epicurus, this quote, if we study Epicurus, their only purpose is to have a good time. Life is short. Epicurus says, enjoyment. That's it. So that's not purpose. Okay? I mean, because Shabbos says the world has a creator who's interested in the world getting towards purpose. The Greeks had to eradicate that. Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is a very unique thing. Rosh Chodesh says that the Beit Din is going to impose on time spiritual reality. The Beit Din declares Rosh Chodesh on a Monday. 10 days later, it's Yom Kippur. The Beit Din declares Rosh Chodesh on a Monday. 2 weeks later, if you eat chametz, you're going to be chayv kares. If they would have made Rosh Chodesh a day earlier or a day later, that's when the spiritual reality kicks in. That's so antithetical to everything. In Greek culture, it's just there's a natural cycle and it just happens, and you don't have any effect on it. And we're saying with Kiddush HaChodesh, we can affect the natural cycle by imbuing it with spiritual reality, spiritual consequences. Brit Milah represents man's ability to overcome his animal base instinct, self-control. And in Greek, why in the world would I want to exercise self-control? I'm here to enjoy. And whatever, if it feels right, I just do it. The only reason I would ever exercise self-control is if it's going to cause damage to somebody or to me, but there's no morality here. There's certainly no reason for self-control for the sake of being beyond your animal instinct. So these are all the things that emanate from the ideology of Greek culture. And again, these are the things we have to take root. It's so entrenched in our culture, and we're so influenced by it. Okay, we have to make sure that we don't get caught up in these ideas when we study Torah. So we'll make it as a very nice quote that I have from one of our alumni who's a professor of literature, and he contrasts the difference between philosophical wisdom in the West and philosophical wisdom of Judaism and Torah. Okay? Philosophical models from Western tradition encourage disengagement. If you're studying a discipline, you can't be emotionally involved. You have to look at it from outside of the system. In so-called detached domain of the ivory tower. That's, by the way, where the phrase of ivory tower came from. The Torah, by contrast, commands that we listen, internalize, and practice. When we study Torah, one of the things we have about Torah is that Torah is lilmod al manat lasod. We're not studying Torah as an intellectual discipline, and this is exactly the Torah that the Greeks tried to uproot. The idea that we're studying Torah to implement. In the Greek world, Torah was informative. It was information. It's informative. In our world, Torah is not informative. It's transformative. When you're studying the Torah, it has to change you. It has to connect you to something beyond the mere physical. So Torah Sheba'al Peh gives man the ability to connect to God's wisdom if he understands how to do it. But that had to replace prophecy. Once there's no prophecy, and it goes together, there's always the idea of Zelu U'Madzeh Asai Elokim. That God always creates the antithesis of the culture. When there was prophecy, where was free choice when there's prophecy? The only way there could be free choice when there's prophecy is if you had Avodah Zorah that had power. Don't you look at Avodah Zarah, you think that's ridiculous. Right? In those days, Avodah Zarah had power. And it had to be that way, otherwise there's no free choice. Once Nevuah disappears, so human wisdom becomes rampant, enlightenment. So now the only way that we could have free choice is that our understanding of Torah has to conflict with a Greek understanding of what Torah is all about. There's a lot to say about the miracle of the oil. If you study more about Chanukah, you will realize that on a technical halachic level, the miracle of the oil was not necessary. There's a concept of tumah hutra v'tzibur. If the entire Jewish people are tameh, you can use tameh oil. We didn't need the miracle. But apparently, at that point, where everything is being viewed as nature, cause and effect, no connection to the divine, your actions don't have any impact on any spiritual realities, God has to show that man's actions, through morality, can have a spiritual impact and change nature. And therefore there had to be a supernatural miracle that was unnecessary to demonstrate that when the Jew behaves properly, there is a relationship with God, and that relationship controls reality. It controls nature. Nature usually, there's no free choice. We have free choice. Ein lachem chelek be'elokei Yisrael, say the Greeks, there's no connection between you and God. And Chanukah is here to say, no. There's an ongoing intimate relationship with God, and that we value it, and that we live it, and that the Torah that we study is our connection with God, that we walk our talk. It's not an academic discipline. And that's one of the reasons why Chanukah is viewed as the holiday of Torah Sheba'al Peh. The Gemara says, we make a bracha. You're going to make a bracha next week. Lighting Chanukah candles. Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu. Well, I know that when I make a bracha, Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu, al netilat lulav, I open up the Chumash. The Chumash tells me, right? When I make a bracha al achilat matzah, I understand the Torah commanded me to eat matzah. Where is it Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah? Where did the Torah ever command me to light Chanukah candles? Says the Gemara, through the rabbis. The rabbis, when the rabbis commanded, it has power of Torah. Why did they choose specifically that mitzvah to teach it to us? Because that's exactly where the Chanukah is the time when we concretize the idea that rabbinic wisdom has Torah power, that the Torah that we're studying connects us with God, and that when Chazal, when the rabbis, when the people imbued with the power of Torah Sheba'al Peh tell us what God wants, and again, not everybody can do it. You've got to be at that level, the moral level, the godlike level. That's why midos are so important. In the Greek world, midos are irrelevant. Midos, what does midos mean? You have to be a giving. You're not a giving person. You're a taking person. You're not a refined person. You're an animalistic person. In Judaism, you have to have good midos. You have to be godlike because you want to access God's Torah. And then, when that happens, we can now say on the mitzvah of lighting Chanukah candles, which again is representing both the miraculous victory, which was not a supernatural miracle, and the lighting of the oil burning, which is a supernatural miracle, that is manifested with Asher Kedishanu, that we also say this was commanded to us by God to relive, to devote ourselves, to commit ourselves to the relationship that we have with God, the antithesis. They wanted to say, Ein lechem chelek be'elokei Yisrael, you're not having a relationship with God. Chanukah is to say we have an ongoing relationship with God. It's not what's on the surface, it's what's below the surface. It's the hidden dimension. Spirituality is always hidden. Tuma, tahara, it's always hidden. It's not on the surface. It relies on our inner moral sense of how we choose to behave, not how we're forced to behave. That's the secret. That's one of the secrets of Chanukah. That's why Chanukah is such a cultural conflict between Enlightenment, Western secular civilization, and the culture of the Torah.